with iSPIRT, and he would be assisting Sharad in the question answer session. So just before I hand over, the question answer session is at the end of Sharad's address and would be moderated by Anjali Bansal, who would also be delivering the vote of thanks. So over to you, Sudhir.
Thanks a lot, Sandeep. And again, a warm welcome. I will also take the liberty to call you Sharad, since that's your request. And I just noticed the one part in your CV which talks about taking companies out of orbit. And that says a lot about your thinking and your vision. So I'm sure we'll have a very enriching session. I think just a couple of points which occurred to us when we looked at this topic is in many ways India's foray into tech in the sense of interface, B2B, B2C, citizens, etc. In many ways, it perhaps started in 2009. We could argue earlier as well, but at least that's recent memory or more or sort of more well known. The National Payments Corporation, and then of course the Nandan Nilekani led UIA. Really set the scene and set the cat amongst the pigeons as well. And I think from there to when we look at 2016 and the RBI regulated UPI, which in some ways, as we know, followed the demonetization initiative. That has really been a big game changer as well more recently. And the statistics tell us this, right? The pandemic, I'm sure, is a contributor. But the fact that from a 1% in value now to 16% in value of transactions going through the UPI tells their own story. Or by volume, it's even higher, almost half. So I think India has come a long way in this area, and that is where the India stack becomes very interesting. We will not get into the social media part of this in today's this thing, but that's a debate and topic by itself. But if I can also refer to one very other important dimension where India's foray into technology has played a pivotal role, I would say, is in the introduction of a tax reform like GST. I can tell you from personal experience, senior leaders, in the Western Hemisphere were actually shocked that India could even attempt something like this. And I know it was not one of the best stories in the initial 6 months as things are in India, but they were shocked, and that is the only word. They said, how could you even be so audacious to have a tax administered in the length and breadth of a country like India almost entirely digitally, and we have come a long way. The results are evident. I'm not saying they are without their problems, but it's a great testimony to the collective technology vision, I would say, of our country. And the fact that it has considerably helped revenue objectives of the government as well. And that is also one of the outcomes which we see. So I think it would be really, I leave it now to you, Sharad, to take us through this. And more importantly, what does the future hold? Technology, as I alluded to in the social media context, people do have this fear as well, the fear of hacking, the fear of cyber thefts, the fear of privacy as well. So your perspectives would be very, very enriching for us. So over to you.
Thank you so much. And let me see if I can bring up my slides here, and then we will be ready to go. Yeah, so hopefully you can see my slides. And can you see my slides all right? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
So in the Q&A session, Pankaj will join me in answering some of the questions. I tend to, I have I get criticized because I have a very Bangalore, the tech kind of a perspective. So I am usually scared of talking to an august audience in the financial and, in the generally industrial space. Like the one that we have today. So I am leaning on Pankaj a little bit to keep me on track. iSPIRT is part of a family of stuff that is happening. Now, I'm sorry to say we've been looking for a better name, but we haven't found one. But it's originated sometime back, 10, 11 years back, as something called the Bangalore Manifesto, and saying that the new India will emerge from this thinking. And this includes not just iSPIRT. You mentioned Nandan. Nandan has an education-based NGO, which is called Ek Step. And that is part of this. There's Takshashila Foundation. There is mosip.io. If you like, you can check it out. It is based in IIIT Bangalore. There is Sahamati. There is Credol. There's a clutch of activities that are happening, and iSPIRT is part of that. Now, iSPIRT is a tech think tank and tech think and do tank, and it's a non-profit. It's also mission oriented. And what sets it apart a little bit is the fact that we take a 20 or 30-year view. Our view is that if you have to change India, nothing happens very quickly. Even if you have to reduce smoking or segregate garbage, let us say, in our cities, in Bombay or in Bangalore, it is going to take 10, 20 years and sometimes more for it to happen. And so things take time. And in the Western democracies, you find an idea that the government is not good at taking a long view of things, because governments come and go, right? So they don't think 20 years. So success of a nation depends on creating institutions that take a long view of things, and they tend to be think tanks. For example, malaria is a 20-year journey, which is anchored by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Then you have driverless cars, has been a 20-year journey, which has been anchored by Carnegie Mellon University. Similarly, Lawrence Labs and Santa Fe Institute are research labs which anchor change over 20, 30 years, especially if it involves technology. So in India, our universities haven't played that role so far. Our research labs haven't stepped up. So we feel that we are filling a gap by being one of those think tanks. The second thing that sets us apart is that we are really powered by no greed, no glory volunteers. So in the value that we create, and luckily considerable value has been created, we don't partake in that value, either to make money for ourselves or to make money even for iSPIRT, right? So it is really a labor of love. Now, this looks very corny at one level, but this is quite common. And many of you actually experience it every day without knowing it. If you've been to Wikipedia, you know the people who wrote that Wikipedia article for you. You don't even know their name. So they didn't do it for glory. They were not paid for it. So they didn't do it for greed. It is also true if you use an Android phone, that the Linux kernel that Google uses, one of the richest companies in the world, but relies on open source to make it happen. I am playing this out to you on a Mac laptop, MacBook. And some of you may know that that's actually based on Unix and Unix kernel. I, of course, use it because I like to believe some of my code is still running on it, but I don't know whether that is true. But so there is a story in the tech industry about no greed, no glory volunteering, which influences our life. And our attempt is to bring that story to India. Because if you go back in time, many people will tell you in Silicon Valley, that story actually originates from India. India has the longest tradition of building copyleft cultural artifacts. So our classical music is different from Beethoven. Beethoven had copyright on his symphonies. In India, our Gharana system, it's a public good right from day one. If you've been to the London Museum, you'll see a plaque there which says that this is the largest collection of copyleft art, when they refer to Indian art, because our sculpture and art was copyleft. So we are really invoking all that and saying, hey, it's time for us not to produce just cultural artifacts, but to produce technology artifacts in the spirit of public good. Why? Because that can help India realize its full potential. So that's a little bit about iSPIRT. I'll touch upon it towards the end again, but let me tell you how iSPIRT, you may have been touched by iSPIRT, is probably some touch points that you've experienced of India Stack. What is India Stack? First of all, is a collection of building blocks. These building blocks are all owned by the government. iSPIRT does not own any one of them. But why they're called India Stack? Because all of them were conceptualized and in some cases even created by iSPIRT volunteers, right? And but then they have been given away without any conditions, and they're now run by the government. They're owned by the government. And many of you must have been, you've been touched by some of these. I think many of you who have taken a geo connection must have experienced eKYC for the first time then. And, and this was the time when you could walk in, put your thumbprint twice, and on an average, 182 seconds later, walk away with a active SIM. Now, this was transformational at that time, because at that time that cost geo about 5 to 6 rupees, per activation, compared to 50, 60 rupees that the paper process cost. And it was faster because you could do it in 3 minutes, and it was much more secure. And at one time, Jio was doing over 1 million eKYCs a day, and they did about 160 in 160 days. And that's how eKYC came into the imagination of what we call as India 1. So what is India 1? India 1, India 2, and India 3 is our way of dividing India into 100 million families each. India is about 300 million families. So India 1 is 100 million families. The middle India is another 100 million families. We call it India 2. And the bottom India is the last 100 million families. Actually, almost all of us are not even in India 1. We call it India 1A. We laughingly call it ourselves, me included, the Californian Indians, right? We are the 30 million Indians whose desire and aspiration is to live like, the Californians there. And so we are, that is the 30 million bubble that we live in. But, that's only 10% of Indian families. So there is a lot more going on in the country in other places. So eKYC, when that started happening with Jio, people would come back to us and say, hey, million, I didn't know the system can hold up if you do 1 million eKYCs a day. And then we would tell them that during that time, on an average, we were doing 9 million KYCs a day. And there were days that we touched 15 million. So even at the peak, Jio never had more than maybe 10% market share of KYCs. And so far, we have done about 10 billion eKYCs, which means 10 billion times somebody or the other has used this system to invoke a new service, right? And open a bank account, start a DBT chain, and so on and so forth, right? Take a mobile SIM, and so on and so forth. So the numbers are very large. It's touched a large number of people. And then, of course, a little later, people started experiencing DigiLocker. Many of us here in Bangalore, we're not traveling now, but if you were traveling, you have to show your ID at the airport. And if you actually watch carefully at the Bangalore airport, you'll find a very significant person, about 20 to 30% of the people don't show a paper identity. They show their DigiLocker identity. Now, an increase, before the lockdown happened, that had started working in other airports too. Otherwise, they would say, "Arey sir, ye to chalega nahi, ye allowed nahi hai, aapko paper dikhana padega." But we were beginning to find, because we were the people who would try and use it and see what the reaction is, that at least in the metros, this had stopped being a problem. And so now, we have the largest collection of government issued documents in DigiLocker. We are about to touch 4.3 billion documents. And so it's a fairly large number. Some of you may have experienced it because your CBSE certificates and things like that are now issued on DigiLocker. And some of you may be interested, if you're entrepreneurs, that one of the volunteers who brought this to life, right? We are all volunteers here, is actually Amit Ranjan. And you may know him because he sold his company SlideShare to LinkedIn, for, I think, if I remember right, $130 million. And he and his sister, Rashmi, had built this company, taken very little VC money. But yet after this, he took a break to contribute in a big way to this mission, iSPIRT mission that we have. Of course, UPI has been mentioned already. UPI numbers are very large now. We are furiously working on getting to 1 billion a day kind of a number. That is the next target. For that, the B2B version of UPI has to kick in. And so that's the big shift that you will see. Also, some of you may have caught it. We generally keep these announcements low-key. That last Thursday, the PM in a tweet and subsequently in a press release did announce e-voucher. And that is a significant new development that is happening in UPI. In the Q&A session, maybe we can get into some of the details. But the other thing that's been kicking in, what UPI is to payments, what is kicking in is something called the account aggregator, AA, for data. And in July, we expect between 300 to 400 million bank accounts to go live from a consumer perspective. So some of you may remember UPI as well in 2016. UPI was launched thrice in that year. On February 11th, 2016, we in Bangalore did the technical launch. It was called the sandbox launch. And then on April 11th, some of you may have even participated. The RBI governor did a launch in Taj, and it was the bank launch. The bank started connecting to the system. And then in August, the consumer launch went live. So similarly, in the AA case, the first two launches have happened, and the third launch is now scheduled for July timeframe. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go forward. But these are going to be your touch points. Very often the touch points that you've had in a way with India Stack, and therefore, in a way been involved with iSPIRT in some way or fashion. All these touch points are not for India One, not for India 1A, certainly, not for us Californian Indians. It is for this lady that you see on the right-hand side of the slide. This is actually a real street vendor. We don't use her real name. We gave her a different name to protect her privacy. We call her Rajni. And I'm going to come back and tell you a little bit more about Rajni in a few minutes. So our iSPIRT mantra is that all that we are doing on the India Stack side is actually for Rajni, and you will see why that is the case as we go forward. Now, UPI transaction, this slide is now old and hackneyed, so I'm not going to spend much time. I hope there is nobody in the audience who has not used UPI. Remember, UPI is safer than wallets. Although, if you did a wallet transaction, let's say with Paytm, you actually talk to Paytm, and the receiving party was also using Paytm. So Paytm was essentially taking money from your wallet and putting it in the wallet of whoever was receiving it. So every part of this was managed by one company, and that was therefore naturally an easy to use system and should have been very reliable. Now, UPI is not like that. As you know, UPI is designed to be interoperable and modular. So if I was to send, let's say, money to Pankaj by using his UPI virtual payment address, and let's say I have used WhatsApp to do this, so then WhatsApp is involved. WhatsApp will have a sponsor bank. One of the 4 sponsor banks they have is Axis Bank. So let's say Axis Bank will be involved. It will debit my bank account. My bank account, let's say, is HDFC. And let's say Pankaj is using SBI, and then NPCI is involved. So you can see there are 5 parties involved in that same simple transaction. And that same simple transaction works actually with lower failure rates, except because of recent stuff that's been happening. But I'll go into that in the Q&A session if you have questions about that. But by and large, when it launched, it had a failure rate which was relatively low. At that time, it was 22 failures for every 100,000 transactions. And it's now, on an average, been about 4 failures for 100,000 transactions. Low failure rate, seamless kind of an experience. And most importantly, of all, with 2-factor authentication rather than a single-factor authentication. So why is this important? And I wanted to explain this to you, in a very, very simple way, because this is an idea which has implications for many other things. So let us say, I was going to have a session after this, and I would set up some time with Anjali maybe on Monday and say, hey, Anjali, give me feedback. How did the presentation go? Did it go well or not? And we agreed that we're going to talk at 9 a.m. on Monday. So what will I do? I'll go to my calendar and I will put the 9 a.m. slot in that. and then I'll put Anjali's email address, and my email system will send an intimation to Anjali. And in that intimation will be included, let's say, Google Meet, that we'll have a chat on Google Meet. So now I've invoked 3 modules. I've invoked a calendar module, let's say for discussion purposes, that for me, that is Google Calendar. It has invoked email for discussion purposes. Let's imagine that is Gmail, and that has invoked Gmeet, right? And that calendar invite is with Anjali. Now imagine the reverse. Instead of me sending it to her, she was going to send it to me. And let us say she used the BCCI has a calendar and it uses Outlook calendar. So she used Outlook and she used BCCI email and she decided to put Zoom in it. And it would work just the same way. Now, left to market players, there is no incentive to make even a simple act of setting up a calendar environment appointment as open and interoperable. If you left it to Google, Google would not make it 3 interoperable modules. So who did it? In this case, it was done by another body called the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF. They take this view and say, hey, we must make sure internet is open and interoperable, open, modular, and interoperable. And so this act of doing that is in a way called playground building, so that one new company can come in and they can do only one of the 3 things well and find a way to insert themselves into the system without permission from Google or permission from any incumbent. And by doing so, you open up the innovation environment for the country, and that makes it work much better than before. So in a way, UPI is an example of that. I thought I'll mention it to you so that you can see where that is coming from. Now, the India Stack numbers are very large. They're mind-boggling, actually. By any yardstick, if you see the DBT, that alone is 30 billion plus that goes. We do, believe it or not, 30 million Aadhaar authentications a day. So today, there'll be 30 million Aadhaar authentications that will happen. We don't appreciate this, that UPI is not the first payment system that was built. There's a predecessor of UPI that was built, and I'll talk about that also in a little bit. And that is doing 210 million transactions a month as well. So what is India Stack, and why is this? Why are these numbers important? The numbers are important because what has happened in COVID times, there is a breakout that has taken place. And some of this, the VCs will tell you, some of the Indian VCs, notably Sequoia, for example, they had been investing, Shailendra, for example, had been investing in the Indian ecosystem, but they also moved to Southeast Asia and started investing in some of the Southeast Asian countries, notably Indonesia. And during COVID, the separation between Indonesia and India has become obvious. So we have a Nitin Kamath of Zerodha who has gone from 2 million users to 4.5 million users here. Why? Because you can do remote KYC. You have a payment system that works. You can exchange high provenance documents with each other in a way that is not possible in other countries. So if you actually contrast India, you have seen a deepening of digitization in India compared to many other countries in the world. And that's been largely because of this public infrastructure that's been created. And this public infrastructure really is in 3 layers. Identity layer, Nandan was instrumental. Nandan had this wisdom and the vision. And he said, and his biggest contribution, there are 2 things I think we will remember Nandan for, 2 very seminal decisions that he and Mr. R.S. Sharma, the UIDAI DG at that time, they took. One seminal decision that they took was that this is a foundational service, right? And if we do identity right, we can do privacy right. If we do identity right, we can do payments right. If we do identity right, we can do data sharing right. We can do health right, right? This was a completely new idea that emerged from India. Now, of course, it's mainstream. World Bank runs a very big program in collaboration with us called ID for Development, right? And but at that time, it was a very new idea. The second thing which they did, which is very, very significant, is to make a bet and say, we will not take the smart card option. We will actually do the number option, right? And that made several assumptions about penetration of internet in India. And luckily, those assumptions have turned out to be right. And so that was very important. Also, it ended up using the volunteer energy at that time. And there had been already a volunteer team that existed, and Nandan tapped into that. And some of you may know that the original version of Aadhaar was built by 22 volunteers. And then, of course, Mindtree came in, and other HCL came in, and other firms came in, and hiring took place. And of course, the system scaled in a very big way. So that is very important. Payments, again, the goal here was not to do a better version of Visa or MasterCard or a better version of RuPay, but to rethink payments from ground up for a country like India, where, of course, the big change has been that it is treated as a public utility rather than as a place for monopoly profits, right? And that has caused pain in the system, but that's also going to have payoffs, already had payoffs, and will have very big payoffs as we go forward. Now, the big thing that is happening is data. And I'll be happy to talk to you in much more detail about this in the Q&A session. But what you can do with UPI, which is own your money, it stays with your custodian, and at your instruction, you can send it easily and near instantly to anybody else that you like, is what you'll be able to do with your personal data, whether it's health data or it's financial data. And once the PDP bill comes, which is the enabling law for data empowerment and protection architecture for any sector that you have. So just the way you had Aadhaar and the Aadhaar law, they didn't come in time, and that created a lot of social media problems. Civil society had trust issues because of that. Here, the goal is to do this more contemporaneously. And so only in two sectors is this being launched right now. One is health, and the second is financial data. But in other sectors, it'll travel only once the PDP bill comes, which is now imminent. The JPC has the report ready, and hopefully will place it in front of the Parliament in the coming sessions, and we should see that bill come out very quickly. So this is really what are the foundational layers of India Stack. And the way they get built out is usually in iSPIRT volunteer team, there is a thing that we got to push one new thing out. So some of you know last year, for example, we pushed OCEN out. OCEN stands for Open Credit Enablement Network. This year's push is actually UHI. It's called Universal Health Interface. I'll briefly mention this. This is what the PM announced actually in a tweet and subsequent press release on Thursday. And so every year we try and push a new thing out, and we are no greed, no glory, right? So we have market players who benefit from this. They get the greed, the policymakers get the glory, and we are on the background, and we have no regrets in taking this approach, because this is the approach which allows us to co-opt both the animal spirits of the private sector and the policymaking abilities of the state, and bring them together into a mission that we think is important for India. So this is really the backstory here. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. The story, as I said, is actually built for a street vendor, Rajni. Our dream is, and this dream is still some years away, our dream is that she'll be able to take an intraday loan on a mobile phone. Intraday, which means she takes a loan of 500 rupees in the morning and retires that loan in the evening. So she goes and buys something wholesale and retires it in the evening. This intraday loans exist today, by the way, and they are at least 1% a day interest rate, and sometimes even more. But even at 1% a day, we think if we bring this into the formal sector, then there is an opportunity to have 10x lower interest rate in the formal sector as we go forward, right? So if she has to do this, she has to do a bunch of stuff. She needs a loan. She has to be able to share her historical data. She looks at many options. She accepts the best offer and sells the loan and pays it off. Now, for this to happen, a fintech has to provide her a solution, right? The fintech is the one which will actually give her all these details. And what is India Stack? India Stack is this outermost layer, which actually helps the fintechs provide her the solution. So think of it, if she had to get a loan before 2013, 2014, then KYC would make this business meaningless, because at 50, 60 rupees a KYC, this would not be viable at all. But at 2 rupees a KYC, this is viable. If she has to sign the loan agreement, e-sign on a regular mobile phone, not a smartphone, makes this viable. UPI allows that 500 rupees to be sent to her and she to be able to return it for 0 MDR. You know, this was not possible in the debit card era. It would have been one person going in, one person coming out, and that would have been more than what the money lender was charging, right? And so we asked ourselves this question: what's the point of disintermediating the money lender and giving the money to foreign multinational companies? You know, that didn't seem right to us. So we actually went to Visa, MasterCard and said, hey, we want you to kind of solve this problem and not charge the MDR. And they came back and they said, instead of 2%, one person going in, one person coming back, you know, they'll charge only half. And then we sat down and we said, damn it, you know, this is not workable. Can we build a new system? So that is when in 2014 is when the UPI work started. 2015 is when RBI took notice of it. We had an engineer turned, finance person there, Raghuram Rajan, and he saw merit in it. We had enormous resistance from the banks, but luckily, better wisdom prevailed, and it was launched. And so this is how UPI came about for Rajini, frankly. And then if there are two Rajinis, one pays on time, one doesn't pay on time, then the one who pays on time should get better interest rate, isn't it? And if she doesn't, she should be able to take her business elsewhere. And some of you may have heard the announcement from RBI that RBI has therefore announced a public credit registry that they are going to launch, which is still about a year or 18 months away, and but that's coming. And the account aggregator is also her way of being able to share data. So there are many things in there, including these APIs for loan offers, which is our announcement from last year, which is called OKEN, right? So this is how the thinking process has emerged. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background as to, why India Stack, right? And what's the driver for India Stack? It's a very, very simple kind of a concept here, in terms of what is India Stack. Now, almost everything is ready, except for public credit registry, which will take some time. We won't launch the intraday loans for Rajini till that happens, because otherwise over indebtedness is a problem that will appear, and that is not a healthy problem. And so that we'll have to wait for some time. While we are waiting for it, we are ready to go live with SMEs. So and I'll come back to that in a minute. So SMEs are going to see a big change in how they obtain loans. But before we get there, the question to ask is this thinking making a difference? Now, these are not my slides. These are slides from Bank of International Settlements. Some of you may know BIS is the central bank to central bankers. There is a very competent person who's heading it. His name is Augustine. What's his last name? It'll come back to me. And he was a Mexican finance minister, very famous. Then he was Mexican central banker, Mexican finance minister, and now here. 2 years ago, Financial Times listed him as one of the possible recipients of the Nobel Prize in Economics. So he's a very accomplished guy. And they've taken to India's work in a very big way. Some of you should go back and read a paper from December 15th, 2019. And the BIS paper essentially recommends the India Stack model as the reference model for the banking industry all over the world, right? And it's a very big kind of a claim that they make. But one of the reasons they make it is that because of India Stack, what happened was that India has been able to get bank account inclusion very quickly. And if you compare it with other countries, the journey that India has done in 7 years is normally would have taken it 46 years if this approach had not been taken, right? And so therefore, that is the significance of this from that perspective. But what it is going to do is really going to be important, because you know better than me that we have been on a deleveraging kind of a sprint in the last many years, right? Especially since the evergreening of the loans was stopped by RBI. But even before that, some deleveraging had started. And we've been deleveraging. And at some point as a country, we have to re-leverage. So as we re-leverage the economy, the question is, are we going to do it the same way as we did before? Where since we have information asymmetry that is solved by relationship banking, and relationship banking means that 40% of our 95 lakh crore loan book is only with 800 companies, right? And our MSMEs are underserved when it comes to lending. Is that going to be the model? Will we have the same kind of problems that we've had in being able to monitor loan use that we will have when we re-leverage? And if all that is the case, then what's the big deal? So in a way, what India SAC is expected to do is to allow us to re-leverage this in a new way. And as Indian economy re-leverages in the next 5-10 years, one of the big areas where we hope that a shift will take place is actually MSME credit. And the shift that will take place in MSME credit is this move away from physical collateral for MSMEs to informational collateral, and therefore to cash flow lending. And to give the groundwork for this, RBI had set up a committee in January of 2019. It's called the UK Sinha Committee. And that's actually laid the foundation for this as we go forward. And in very soon this year, you will see this roll out as we go forward. And it'll allow for a new type of lending to happen, which is called cash flow lending. And some of you are in the banking sector, saw a new category of lending, retail, take off in a big way. And it's variously estimated at 8 to 10 lakh crores. And now various people are estimating that this will be about 17 lakh crores in the next 5 to 7 years. And there is an initial wave one cohort of people that are involved in this. In the Q&A session, if you like, I'm happy to even share who those players are and what are the strengths that they bring to the system. So a real test of all this that I've spoken to you about India Stack is really not the big numbers. Those are good numbers, you know, and we are very proud of them, but that's not outcomes on the ground. The outcomes on the ground for us will be that if we are able to democratize credit in India in a way that we cannot imagine today, right? And that everything that we have done is in a way a lead up to that kind of a goal as we go forward. So that's really what's going on here. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and take you a little bit deeper into our thinking. The question is, why are we doing it? We are not doing it to build digital public goods. You know, we are doing it because that's our way to democratize credit. Frankly, we are not even doing it to democratize credit. We have even a deeper objective at work. Remember, I started this by saying that iSPIRT is a mission-oriented, tech think tank. So what is iSPIRT's mission? iSPIRT's mission is actually to help usher in the third innovation innings in India. And if you give me I'm kind of running over, but if you give me 10-15 minutes.
Sharad, please keep going. We have all got as much time as you will give us. So please keep going.
I hope to bring this to life. So first is, you remember when we got independence, and remember even the reason the British came to India or all these colonization happened because they wanted our natural resources. They wanted our cotton, they wanted our spices, they wanted our gold, right? So after independence, we are essentially a natural resources economy at that time. But to our credit, and I think we should be very proud of this, that we have actually made it a viable services economy. And you'll probably wholeheartedly agree with me that we can create world's best services companies today. So if you look at airlines, Indigo Airlines or even Vistara, they're amongst the world's best airlines. If you look at hospital, we in Bangalore here have Narayan Hridyalaya. In Bombay, you have some wonderful, every city, big city, metro has some wonderful hospitals. But Narayan Hridayalaya is one of the world's best cardiac hospitals, right? You can look at IT services, TCS, Infosys, Wipro, they're world's best IT services companies, right? Amongst the best. And there's no doubt about that. If you even look at mobile operators, Jio is, one of the best. Even Airtel is pretty good. And I've lived in the US and I can tell you both of them are far better than Verizon, right? So we've learned how to create services companies in India. And that's a very, very important play for us. But we now also have to learn how to create a corresponding side of this, which is the product business. And if we do that, then we will also have a Korea element to us. Otherwise, we'll only have a Thai element to us. So think of it. In Korea, you can always name Korean product companies, right? In Thailand, you can't name any because it's a services economy. And Korea decided consciously, believe it or not, in 1974, that they're going to go after the third innings. And at that time, when they took that decision, their per capita income was less than that of Thailand. Today, it is 5.6 times of Thailand. And Thailand is, by any definition, an East Asian tiger, a success story by itself. So what allowed them to be 6 times bigger than Thailand, which was itself doing very well, is the fact that they embraced third innings. Now, Korea is not got a services innings. It has only the product innings. Israel has only product innings. And by the way, the product innings is very good because their market cap of companies in the US is higher than our IT services market cap. So the most successful Indian industry is humbled by Israel in that way. But they're a product player because they don't have many people, right? But China or US are both a product and services play. And sadly, Europe is neither. So the question in the future is, we will be either a lost country like Europe, or we will be at least a country like Thailand, or we will be a country which will also layer on top of what we have achieved a product story, and therefore we'll be able to realize our full potential as a country as we go forward. So why is product so important? It is important because in each of these 4 examples that I gave you, let us see what actually happens. If you take health, Pfizer makes, and in fact, I should correct this slide. I keep forgetting to do that. Pfizer makes more money than the top 100 hospital chains in the US. Wrap your mind around it. So their profitability is very high. Or Boeing and Airbus make more money than all the profitable airlines of the world put together. Cisco is having a bad year, profitability wise, and yet it makes more money than the top 5 European mobile operators, which by the way includes Vodafone and Telefonica and others. And Microsoft, don't even get me started today, but in its low point before Satya took in, when they had a profit dip, they made more money than the top 20 IT services companies of the world put together. Now, of course, with their financials doing well, there is absolutely no comparison. So this is a new development. And it's very important to appreciate what is happening here. See, in the old model, you took out oil in Saudi Arabia. You refined it in Jamnagar and sold it in Bangalore. Everybody made money. You grew cotton in Punjab. You had yarn that was done in Moradabad. And then you made fabric in Lucknow. And then you turned it into kurtas in Patna. And in that value chain, everybody made money. But many of you will be listening to this on a PC, Windows laptop, right? And if you are, you will realize, you should know that there has never been a year where Windows and Intel have made less than 86% of the profits of the laptop and the desktop market. 86%, which means in your laptop, the person who made the hard disk, the person who made the screen, the person who made the PCB, the person who designed that laptop, that manufactured that laptop and sold it to you, were all left to make only 14% of the value chain profits. So there are value chain landlords. That landlord is Wintel and everybody else is a value chain serf. Now, this is a new development. Heavens forbid if you're listening to this on an Apple device, then it's even worse than 86%, as you know. So what has happened is that in this new value chain that has emerged, things have changed in a very, very big way. So if we have our car industry, which is 3 lakh crores, 40,000 crores, 3 lakh crores is the revenue, 40,000 crores is the profitability that is split between the dealers that are there, between the original car manufacturers, and then tier 1 and tier 2 ancillaries. Everybody makes some money out of that 40,000 crores. But imagine when the car industry goes EV and they sell the same number of cars, let's say 3 lakh crores is still the revenue. And let's say the profitability is the same, which is 40,000 crores. At that time, what's going to happen is that 80% of that 40,000 crore profitability will go to only two players, the software players and the battery players. And there are only 2.5 companies in the world which have the battery technology for this current generation. And that, as you know, is Tesla. In China, that is BYD, the first investment that Warren Buffett made in China many years back. Some of you probably follow him and know about that. And the third half chance is Panasonic, struggling to actually become a full player. But, some days it looks it'll happen, some days it looks it won't happen. And if India has to be a player, it has to win the next generation. Next generation means that, like BYD, we need to be making a 10-year bet into the future, which, by the way, we are not making as a country today. So really, if the issue that becomes important here is that we've done a great job of the 14% part of the business, the surf part of the business. We are a land of Uber drivers. We are a land of, don't mind my saying that, we are a land of Uber drivers. We are a land of bankers. We are a land of job work doers, right? But that is not where the big money is going to be in the future. And is that important? Yes, it's important because it gives us employment. It lets us get to the Thailand level. But if we really want to get to the Korea level, if we want to create wealth and retain it in India so that we get to $10,000 per capita, then we need this new innings to come in. And this new innings needs its own innovation architecture. Just the way if you were innovating in natural resources, in spices, in cotton, in gold, you would innovate in a way very different in the way that Indigo and TCS innovate. Similarly, if you're a product company, you innovate in a very, very different way. And that has to come about as we go forward. So that is the future that we have to aspire to as we go forward, right? And that, to bring that to life, to bring that innovation architecture to life, we have to understand what it is. And iSPIRT exists for that reason. And we know we can't do it in many areas, but we can do it in a few areas. And what does it take for us to do that? For that, you have to understand that there is a whole hidden innovation kind of a pyramid that is there. At the bottom, so that if this is an example which a very, very famous person in Mumbai, industrialist, I won't mention his name, but if I mention his name, he's very famous in Mumbai. He said, look, I understand what you're saying, Sharad. He said, and I'm going to use his words, I hope he doesn't mind that. He said, when I go to the bathroom, I see a porcelain sink. And we are accustomed to saying, how do I get into this business of selling that porcelain sink? But the value of the porcelain sink is because the water comes in. And that is the plumbing. And the plumbing is possible because small pipes can be connected to big pipes. And that is the standards, the protocols, standards that are there. And what you are telling me is that the money is no longer in the porcelain. The money is in the plumbing and the money is in the protocols. And yes, that is true. Since we don't have a history of building that plumbing and protocols, I gave you an example of protocols for setting up a calendar appointment, right? So that it's open, modular, and interoperable. And so since we don't have a history of doing that, iSPIRT is solving that problem today. And we are doing it in a few areas so that we can bring to life a product layer. And why we think it is it's a worthy cause to go after, because by solving for these two and having a good services layer, we are in a position to actually fill this middle layer, missing gap that we have. And if we can do that, I think India will benefit in a big way. So what is iSPIRT about? iSPIRT is really about building the bottom two layers in a no greed, no glory model, and letting the product companies come up and helping them win. And if you, and we can give you examples of this later in the Q&A sessions, but that is really what iSPIRT is about. And so how do we approach this? We approach this with a very, very simple way. And we say, look, pick a problem and build a whole playground. In a whole playground, all these 4 players are there, right? So build the infrastructure. We build the infrastructure, give it to the government. We help shape the policy and help the marketplace and bring all 3 together. And our learning is that unless these 3 things happen in a coordinated fashion, India does not change. But when these 3 things happen in a coordinated fashion, India changes very quickly. I'll give you an example and you will probably relate to this. See, in India, we started television in 1965. And, to get television in your city, you needed a Doordarshan tower somewhere close by. So by the time you rolled into 1988, there were only 34 television towers in the country. So if you were in Bangalore, you could get television, but you were in Gulbarga, you could get television. But you were anywhere else in Karnataka, you would not get television. And you will remember, people had tall antennas. Then came a new infrastructure called PAMSAT and subsequently INSAT that made it redundant. You did not needed television towers anymore. And luckily, there was a policy in the works called Prasar Bharati. And the person, and what it allowed was to have private programs on Doordarshan. So since people wanted to watch Hum Log and Mahabharat and all of those programs, there was a private ecosystem that came up, which was cable television operators who were willing to wire up the whole town, very quickly and brought television to everybody. And all these studios came up. And in fact, everybody that you know in the television industry is in that 7-year period from 1988 to 1995. In fact, some of you may know that India today, which was doing very well at that time, said will not get into television, but thankfully they did. And today they survive only because of the television and nothing else. So in 7 years, we were able to grow the television watching audience 20 times of what we had been able to do from 1965 to 1988. This is what we have witnessed with identity. This is what we have witnessed with payments. This is what we're going to witness with data sharing. Mark my words. And this is what we're going to witness with credit. And in a few years' time, this is what we will witness with health also as we go forward, a new paradigm for health. Now, outsiders are noticing this. And, I'm not going to read this because you know all of those people. But I don't know whether you know this data story that we have, which is called Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture. If you go to Vasant Dhar is a very, very well-regarded professor in NYU Stern. He is the founding editor of the #1 journal in data called Big Data. And he's now again the chief editor. He's come back, it rotates and he's back in that role. And look for his Washington Post printed opinion piece saying, hey, US has fallen behind. We do only consent for collection of data, not for sharing of data. We must catch up. We can't follow the Chinese model because it's not citizen friendly. We can't follow the European model because it's not innovation friendly. Let us follow the Indian model and apply it lock, stock and barrel. And some of you should know that he was part of the Elizabeth Warren campaign. And the Elizabeth Warren was a policy wonk. That is how she ran. And in that policy, her policy paper was, if she comes into power as a president, she is going to take the Indian DEPA model and apply it in the US. So there is stuff like that that is happening. And this is not merely the policy guys who are saying this. This is people from that you look up to in your community, investor community. This is the hedge fund guy. Many of you know Raul Paul. I'm not going to read this again, and he says, you can read this by yourself. But more recently, just in January of this year, this is the co-founder of Coinbase, which went IPO and often called one of the 5 leading people in the crypto world, Balaji Srinivasan. This is what he said. And you can see he is referring to the very slides that you are watching as we today. So there is some appreciation of that outside. And why are they appreciating this? Because this protocol and the protocol and the platforms layer, we built it in a very, very different way than what a private company would build. So if Amazon was to build it, they would do everything on the left-hand side. If Swiggy was to build it, they would do everything on the left-hand side. And our belief is that India should not be a place for centralized monopoly platforms for core things. We don't mind if it happens in food, but we mind if it happens in health. We mind if it happens in finance. So we believe India needs a different approach, which is what India Stack or Health Stack is an example of. And this is really, I'm not going to go into the details here, but this is really what it is. But it has implications for you. Implications for you because in the third innings, you must operate differently as a market player. Because in this new world that is emerging, there are implications for you. And that implication is about non-linear change. How do you embrace it? How do you set strategy? How do you set your mission? How do you organize internally within the company? It has to be all different. And I'll just set the stage for it and make a case that it is different. That look, when, one of the misconceptions is that UPI did well because of demonetization. UPI was launched in August 2016 before demonetization, by the way. And then, of course, demonetization, they formed a National Digital Payments Committee where Nandan and I were also there. But actually, the real uptick that started taking place in UPI, as you will see, was in actually September of August of 2017, a year later. And everybody who got into this after September of 2017 is a bit player in UPI ecosystem today. Everybody who got in before this, when UPI had to first yet hit the first inflection, is still around. And this is very disconcerting in India because we tend to think that, "Are yaar, ye jab numbers अच्छे लगेंगे ना, तब चलेंगे इसमें करेंगे." And in this new kind of world that we live in, it is too late. You can never catch up in this world. And I'm happy to talk more about this in Q&A if the question comes up. And this is the only prep time that you have. So one of the purpose of doing these kind of presentations is to make you aware of this third innings that is coming, because this third innings will create more value than the second innings has created. And I'm hoping that Mumbai, which is the epicenter of market players in India, will be also the set of people which will embrace this third innings. And to do so, they will build a new innovation architecture that we need as we go forward. Now, iSPIRT has decided that we will only do it in a few areas. So we say, look, if we can prove that this can be done, India needs 30 iSPIRTs. So we have a program called vSpirit. In fact, our first vSpirit member, which is an iSPIRT-like entity for livestock, for livestock, animal husbandry and the like, is going live, and it is going to be producing something called Livestack. It's going to be a sister organization to iSPIRT. iSPIRT is helping it come up, but it is not going to be a daughter to iSPIRT. And that is vSpirit. We want 30 such organizations to come up, because we, in our volunteer model, to retain the magic of iSPIRT, we need to remain small number of volunteers, about 100 volunteers that we are. Right? So if we become 1,000, it will not work. So we want to remain 100, but help create many more iSPIRTs that come up. Why we think that will be possible is because of something called the Roger Bannister effect. I don't know, many of you may be marathon runners, so you may know about him. He is the person in 1954 who broke, after 150 years of trying, not by him, but by everybody, obviously, the 4-minute mile barrier. But in the same year, after he broke it, 2 more people were able to do it. The next year was a drought, but the year after, 17, another 14 people were able to do it. And today, 1,400 people are able to do this. So the human thing is that if one person can get to the Everest, that makes it possible for many others to get to the Everest. So our goal as iSPIRT is really to open the door to the new innings that we are talking about. Show that it is possible in 3 areas. Credit democratization, which I've talked to you. We don't have time to talk about health, but this is a very big area for us. And finally, pull logistics. We want India to shift from push logistics to pull logistics. Just the way Japan is able to do, but even better. Now, this sounds very crazy, and it sounds as if nothing is happening, but something is happening. You may have heard of the digital sky policy for drones, a new policy with Maps 3.0. Vani is wireless access network interface that is coming. So we've been quietly at work as usual. And our hope is that all of you will ride these new thermals that will come up. Because the way to make money, the way to make a big business is to identify a thermal and then ride it to the top. So we hope to create these thermals, and we hope you will be greedy enough to ride those thermals, because our central point is that in India, problems can only be solved with a jugalbandi of private innovation and public digital infrastructure. And we are keen that this jugalbandi happens. And that is the coming together of Bangalore, Mumbai, and Delhi. So if Bangalore can give you the digital public infrastructure, Mumbai can give you the market players that will ride it, and Delhi can give us the right policy. You remember that earlier slide, 3 slides? If we 3 cities can work together and bring the best of what we offer, then a new India will emerge, and we will meet our fullest potential as India. So with that, I'm not going to read this slide, but thank you for being very patient listeners. And with that, back to Anjali.
Thank you very much, Sharad. And what an incredibly energizing, pithy statement to end with. The jugalbandi of private enterprise and digital public infrastructure. And in some ways, bringing together Bangalore, Bombay, and Delhi, and what each of these cities actually stands for. So very inspiring. And I'm sure, I think there's a sort of widespread demand that I'm seeing on the chat of getting you back to talk about health, because you said we won't have time today. So we are going to come back to you for more time on that. Let me start off with a couple of questions on the group, and I'll try and bundle questions so you can address them together. I'm actually going to be a little greedy and start with one of my own. And that is, you talked about value chain landlords.
Yes.
So all of us, in some ways, when we think public spiritedly, in our private enterprise, we want to be a value chain landlord. But when you think about public spirit and what is good for the citizen, how do you democratize value chains? And we are seeing this, there is disproportionate value capture happening across value chains. Is that here to stay? How do we break that?
No, I don't think it is here to stay. I think what has happened is that, and I want to give you this backstory. All along, this notion that so you can see this with very simple 2 examples. COVID times. In India, the vaccine that India has produced, which is the Bharat Biotech vaccine, right? We should know happened because of rotavirus. There was a phenomenal person, Dr. Bhan of AIIMS, right? A pediatrician who had this mission saying, these Western companies will never do the rotavirus because it's not a problem in the West. And he helped build this rotavirus ecosystem in India. And some of you know that he became the DBT secretary, and he created BIRAC. And BIRAC funded 3 clinical trials, the first clinical trials that were done by anybody in India. And much to the uproar, they gave the entire money for the clinical trials. 50 crores at that time was a lot of money. And that is how India became a market leader in rotavirus. And then Serum Institute got a so rotavirus, Bharat Biotech is the product player because they invented something. Right. Serum is the services player, which is a contract manufacturer. But that would not have happened without the rotavirus success story. Right? So we've done it there, right? You can see this play out in space transportation in the US, right? Where the US is saying we're going to have private sector drive space transportation, and they're helping all the private players come up, and then they'll pick a winner, and that will become the national winner. And most likely that will be SpaceX, when there'll be no choo-choo, because that will be an obvious thing that it was better than Lockheed and better than Boeing, and therefore deserves to be picked, right? This is happening with mRNA. So all the gains that we see, digital optoelectronics, Japan created joint optoelectronics research laboratories, and therefore you have Japan as a leader of optoelectronics. So the point I'm making is, what happened in the US? US forgot its own playbook, right?
Right.
And now you can say because of China didn't forget it. Who got this playbook? The US got this playbook from, and we can get into more detail. But now that playbook is coming back in the US. So in India, the goal here is that to prevent these monopolies from coming up, you must create public goods and private innovation. And that public goods is hard for the government to create in India. And by the way, it's hard even in the US because the government doesn't have that capability. So internet was not built by government. It was built by IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, a bunch of volunteers, for heaven's sake, right? Supported by the government. So this is a spirit that we have to bring in. And this is our own spirit of pay forward. And so I think in India, what we are trying to do is what key areas like finance, education, health, create a set of, we are not big believers in centralized platforms. We want to create protocols because we can have unified systems for a diverse country like India, which allow everybody to build on top. But then like UPI, even if Google Pay has 90% market share, damn it, it's going to be our own payment system owned by NPCI.
No, and it is often said, and I say it all the time, that in some ways the biggest made in India innovation is UPI. There is nothing like that anywhere else in the world. So public-private partnership, not owned by private sector, not owned by government.
Protocols, owning the plumbing,
absolutely,
will allow us to allow private sector to come up for products and services. And by doing that Jugalbandi right, I think we will not have that problem. So by focusing not on centralized platform, but distributed applications, get this right.
So very good question that's come in from, it's a question on when we talk about these kind of things, how do we make them available to the Rajnees? And this is KH Meyer who's saying 84% profit goes to Wintel. How is it in the mobile market? And I'm adding on to that, Rajni is a feature phone user. We find more and more innovation now happening for smartphone app users. So how do we get this to Rajni? And Sharad, you know, at ACT, we are working on creating something like this for the Rajni sitting in Sarguja and Chhattisgarh. But
so, you know, there already your work that you are doing by creating this new fund that you are doing, some of the work that Avanti is doing, and maybe I can give a slide before. So I think I want to say is that before we get to Rajni, we'll have to get to GST paying MSMEs, because if we can't make it work,
I think that's a fair point. Let us increase our revenue base. So let's talk about MSME.
GST, you know, that's a way station, right? It's like, if it's like saying for phone savvy people, if they cannot use UPI, it'll never work for people who are not phone savvy, right? So we have to get to MSME. So I want to flash a couple of slides here to answer that question, and I want to say that there is very good private sector participation that is taking place. So to get to MSMEs, you need 8 players. Traditionally, the lending was only lenders and credit bureaus. Now you need UPI.
And may I just sort of point out also, MSME is a topic very dear to Bombay Chamber. We actually actively represent MSMEs as well as part of our membership.
And you know, and if we become hollow because of this COVID crisis and the general decline that is taking place, India will never be an important economy, because employment will happen in the MSME sector, and MSME sector, you know, can also be a source of innovation. So we need loan service providers, data providers. So these are many new types that are coming up. And what I'm the slide that I will go to here, if I can get to, is the slide. Come on. Yeah. So the slide I want to say is that many people are already very active. So what has happened is that wave one lenders these are the wave one lenders. Right now in this, HDFC Bank and SBI were not wave one for UPI. I want to keep reminding those of you who are in SBI and HDFC, you chose not to be part of wave one of UPI and suffered. And Arundhati, ma'am, she was brilliant, because it's September 6th, after a long meeting, Nandan, me, all of us met her in in Trident. It was supposed to be a 1 hour meeting, 2 hour meeting, but dragged on. And in the end, she says, okay, I'm going to do this. And next day, it was the Economic Times cover story. And then we said, how did it happen? Because we left only at 7 o'clock. How did you get permission from everybody in SBI? And I am probably going to get her into trouble. But she has said it herself. She said, if I went through the formal process, I would never have been able to convince everybody. So I just announced this. And so now SBI is wave 1. Now HDFC is strongly wave 1.
Right.
And so there is value in being wave 1. And then we have lots of loan service providers who are coming up. And then there is capital that is coming in through, thoughtful people like you. And also Avanti Finance is even making capital available for those who are not commercially viable at this time. So ecosystem is building. And I think you will see action as we go forward this year.
There's a very interesting question from Sudhakar Prabhu saying very basically on payment gateways and he has mentioned a couple of them. So not that we have anything against, but these are the ones mentioned, Infibeam, Paytm, etc. Why should someone use payment gateways paying commission to these gateway companies when UPI is available free?
Yeah, of course. See, the newspaper vendor, I live in an apartment complex. The newspaper vendor in our complex sends us a message on a phone number saying, sir, your bill is, I remember I got that message because it's third, right? 740 rupees, right? 740 rupees has to be paid, and he collects that payment on UPI. You can send it to him any way that you like, WhatsApp or, he doesn't care. Now for that, he doesn't need a website. He doesn't need a payment gateway. All that he needs is a list of mobile numbers and the money that has to be collected and one VPay account with any provider on the other side. So now, unfortunately, what has happened is, and I'm so happy this question has come. If you go back and listen to February 13th, 2015 speech of Raghuram Rajan, when UPI was announced, he said this is going to be a public utility and not public profits model. Right? In the follow-up back and forth, it was said that this old model of payment gateways that you can charge 2%, 3%, 1% is not relevant in the UPI model at all. But sadly, what had happened was that, in fact, and then 1 year later on February 11, 2016, when that launch took place, I must tell you this story. I'm going to beat up the investors here a little bit, was that 321 people attended. Only one of them was a VC. And after this was over, and this is Alok Goyal, some of you know him from...
Know him very well. And I can tell you the VCs have all learned their lesson. Every single VC is looking at which value chain will next get disrupted.
Exactly.
And be before 2017 on that, not after 2017.
He said, how come nobody came from your community? He said, Sharad, I must tell you, even I came because I'm an ex-Googler. We were really taken aback. So we went back to the VCs. VCs were very clear. They said, look, this is neither like China nor like Visa, MasterCard. It's not going to work in India. We don't want to waste our time there. Right? And you should ask this question, why PhonePe, which had a $10 million term sheet, was not able to take that financing. I won't humble that VC here. And had to go back to its original employers. Luckily, they had left Flipkart on good terms to say, "Yaar, thoda paisa de do, tumhare paas bahut sara paisa hai." Now it turned out to be good for Flipkart, and of course, it's really good for Walmart. But it is a stinging rebuke of the VC industry in India because we were not familiar with this model, so we didn't want to invest in it. But I agree with you, Anjali. This has changed. Lots of changes have happened. And so therefore, I feel, now the build out will take place much faster because, we are beginning to see risk capital. You even have a fund called the Bharat Innovation Fund, right? And so which is named itself like that. Right. And so therefore, more is happening in this area.
And you have the government of India announcing 1,000 crores to support startups, seed fund for startups. So yes, absolutely.
As UPI goes in the B2B segment, the only place where they could hide for a little while was B2B segment. As they go there, they are going to die. And so be careful about any investments that you make in that area.
So Sharad, that's a neat segue into...
One thing here. One of the person who got religion on this early is actually Vijay Shekhar Sharma. Right? And I just want to mention this. If it's, I want, so in February, in May of 2015, I'm not exact, in 2015. Remember, UPI had been launched. Nobody has taken it seriously. We invited Vijay Shekhar Sharma to Bangalore. This is an ITC Gardenia in Bangalore. Nandan is there. Sanjay Jain is there. We prepared hard for this presentation to say, why must you embrace this? Because he had Alipay money. Our fear was that we were going to compete with Alipay at that time, right? And in our team, Sanjay Jain, great guy, Pramod Verma, you know some of these. These
yes,
are
Pramod, we know well. Sanjay,
absolutely
yes.
wonderful. Nandan. So we are now sitting with him. And Sanjay has prepared the presentation to actually talk to Vijay Shekhar Sharma. But after the preliminary conversation, Vijay says, no, I'm convinced. Now you have this awkward feeling that you prepared many hours for the presentation and the other guys, before you open your presentation, is already agreed. So Sanjay is saying, no, but let me walk you through the presentation. And Vijay says, no, but I've already agreed. So now Nandan asks him, he said, but why have you agreed? Tell us, why do you have agreed? And he says something which is seminal. He says, look, what I learned in 197 in the telecom space is when there is a battle between a closed system and an open system, open system wins. This is my learning from AOL and Yahoo. This is my personal learning in the telecom space, you know, with what has happened in telecom. So I want to say that my system is better, but if I compete, I'll anyway be humbled and I'll play catch up. So therefore, I will go and embrace this early on. And to his credit, and I want you to go back to this, I remember these dates because they were so important to UPI's future. 8th December 2016. This guy is in Hong Kong. He says, I want to do a press conference in Bangalore. So we do a press conference on 8th December 2016. Nandan and I are quoted in that conference. And he announces that he will be the company that will embrace India Stack faster than anybody else. So he has understanding of an open system and a closed system that other payment players did not have. And therefore, I think Paytm by and large has done a good job of transitioning. Although, you know, it had most to lose in that transition from a closed system to an open system, and therefore has remained viable. So I want to acknowledge good people as well who get this while I was beating up some VCs. So I
absolutely, no, VCs can be beaten up; they can take it, not a problem. So we are going to run out of time shortly, and I don't think we can do justice in one session. We will request you for more time another time on health. But I want to close this with a couple of interrelated questions. You talked about MSME and flow-based lending. I think it'll be of interest to some of our members and people who are listening in. And then very quickly on e-voucher and account aggregator. And then there has to be a question on NUEs and the new umbrella entities. And what does this mean? Why do we need that when we have UPI that seems to be working so well? So it's all little bit together, but I'll put it to you. So flow-based lending, e-voucher, account aggregators, and a little bit about why is NUE useful even.
Pankaj, do you want to take a shot at some of them?
Sharad, you go ahead first.
Yeah, so e-voucher is designed for in-kind payments instead of cash payments. So today, what government is able to do is to give 2,000 rupee to somebody. You know, a farmer gets, let's say, 2,000 rupees per quarter, right? It's deposited as money and they can use it for whatever they like, right? What if that 2,000 rupee was given as a voucher for fertilizer? They can only buy fertilizer for that. And what if that money was given not by the government, but a company could give that to its employees, or an insurer could give OPD coupons to the people that they have insured, right? So the way that, and that system is now ready for deployment. So this is a system that is available. It's a value-added service, and so on UPI. And a version of this already runs. As you know, a value-added service of this kind is the IPO filing that you do on UPI, where it blocks your money. And if you get the IPO, it debits it. If you don't get it, you know, the money, it releases the lien on that money, right? So what this does, e-voucher does it. It allows the person who's issuing the voucher to block the money and then issue the vouchers. If their vouchers are consumed, that money is debited. If the vouchers are not consumed and they lapse, that money is removed, the lien is removed from you. So the lien is there for the private sector. The banks can now extend credit to you or keep real money. And in the government of India, of course, they don't have to keep the money in the bank, but that is the system that is there. So
it takes DBT one step further, makes it even more efficient, even less leaky, and makes it very specific.
And why is this important? Because you can give it a school voucher. See, RTE implementation can be that if you're eligible for RTE, you get a school voucher. Then you can take that money, 6,000 rupees a year that the government is giving you, to any school and get a chance of a better admission, right? So you can introduce these kind of coupons or vouchers at scale in the economy. And not only can the government do it, but what government is going to use is the same system that the private sector will use. Right. And so insurance claims and health kind of claims and others can be settled much more easily that way. So that's the e-voucher story. What was
account aggregator and flow-based lending?
Account aggregator is, wait till July, you will see this come out. The name will be changed, and because the name is not very good, it will be more consumer-centric name. But essentially, it is the same thing like UPI. The difference between UPI and a wallet is that UPI is present pay versus prepay. See, in the wallet, you first put the money in the wallet and then spent it from the wallet. In UPI, the money stays with whoever is the custodian of your money, your bank account. And then you pay it in real time as you go along. Now, imagine your data is the same, as valuable as your money. And your data is sitting in your bank, is sitting with your insurer, is sitting with your mutual fund, and so on and so forth, because you need this data to the lender so that the lender can assess you better. So what can you do is you go to one of the consent managers. These are 3 licensed entities so far. There's 7 that have got in principle license, and more will be coming. You go to them and you give them the permission, and your data will flow to whoever you want. And the person who you give the permission to cannot see your data. Just the way when you use UPI with PhonePe and Google Pay, the money doesn't flow through PhonePe and Google Pay. Money still flows through the banking system. Only the consent flows through Google Pay. So this is a system which is, and the same system is happening for health. So that's called personal health records. So, and then once the PDP bill comes, the same system will be applied, because the PDP bill in its current form has that it should be done with consent managers. And the JPC is going to issue a report, and nobody is allowed to have seen the report because the MPs have to see it first. But our understanding is that it strengthens some of those aspects. So this will then bring that system to life. And even with 300 million to 400 million bank accounts going live on this in July, this will be a bigger launch than GDPR was back in time. But as usual, our goal is not to highlight the launch. We want facts on the ground to come up. We are not big believers in big launches. We want quiet launches, but the numbers to build up and then have a aha.
We like rollouts.
We like rollouts.
We like rollouts and then let it build.
Our learning is there's no such thing as immaculate conception. You have to iterate, solve problems, and then it becomes stable and then becomes successful.
Will this AA framework also then help, or is it not related at all, to individuals having more ownership of their own data? If data is the new oil, why should the oil company take it? It's my data, right? Why should Google benefit?
You nailed it. It is exact. So we called it, if you go back and you should see the launch, this was launched as a concept in August 16, 2017. Actually, and it is there in the site called indiastack.org /DEPA. And if you see the video, there's a Nandan presentation and Siddharth Shetty presentation. And there we call it data democracy. So we are saying that data should be owned by the user. And if the data is owned by the user, they can give it to whoever they like, right? And they can give it for money. They can make money from their data if they so want, right? So it is going to bring a new era of data economy in the country. And we hope that will do well. And if it does well, other countries may also show interest in doing it.
Right. And then finally, one last piece very quickly. I think everyone's kind of having to leave. But I want to squeeze one more question in, which is your view really on what is the utility of NU to the extent. And maybe Pankaj can take that. What's the utility? How is it useful? And we'll wrap right after that.
this is stepping on RBI's toes is never a good idea, right?
Then let us
But
not.
I will just say the
I think it's not yet out.
UPI was designed to be a multi-switch system, right? So which means that we should have multiple switches purely from a resilience point of view, right? Also, having said that, I would like to point out that many critical parts of our payment system are not T+0.
Right.
I mean, there is a case to be made that all the stock exchange transactions should move to T+0. If that has to happen, and that is possible technologically, then does it make sense to have a dedicated switch to do that? And if so, does it make sense to have a dedicated institution to do that? You know, those are the questions that RBI is looking at. But that is the way, the framework within which to think. Because I think there is merit in having a T+0 payment system countrywide for all transactions. And we've seen RTGS has helped us, IMPS has helped us, NEPG has helped us. Having friction-free payment as a public utility for all payments in the country is beneficial as we go forward. And therefore, thinking about what is the reform in payment systems that is needed, that will help us to get to a T+0, 100% T+0 payment system for even, you know, high transaction things in the securities market, for example, and I could give you other examples, will make it very worthwhile as we go forward.
Great. Thank you so very much. And I will not do a long thank you, but Sharad, Pankaj, really, really appreciate this. It has been such a rich discussion, lots for us to take away and think about. And I'm sure there will be, as I've said already, a clamor for you to please come back and talk to us about health as and when that becomes more ready. We are very grateful for your taking the time and sharing all of this insight with us. I also want to thank the Bombay Chamber team, our DG Sandeep Khosla, his team that has put all of this together, our webinar partner, Jackstein Practices and Consulting LLP. And on behalf of all of us, thank you so much, and all the attendees.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Sharad. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.